Hello, everyone. Welcome to the video. This is the behind the scenes for the Envision song that should have been released at this point. Just going back, and I'm going to be talking about how things went in terms of how I produced everything and the mixing and mastering to the best of my abilities, as I'm still learning how to do all of that stuff generally. So, I don't have an intro, so this is the intro. So, let's just jump straight into it. Okay. So, for this song, I actually started off by sampling this song from an old video game called, hopefully I don't butcher it, called Idol Janshi Tsuchipai 3. And this seems to be Nanami's theme. It's called Destiny Cyber Knight. Now, I have no idea what is going on with this game. And I don't mean that to say that this game is just weird or anything. I mean, I literally just don't know how this game plays. I think I found this song off of some random like YouTube video of this guy saying these are like the best OSTs or best songs from video games. And I think I heard this in passing on that playlist. Or maybe I just heard it randomly somewhere else. And I was like, oh, that sounds really cool. That sounds like a vibe I would like to mess around with. So I'm going to uh, hopefully not mess myself up with copyright here by showing you guys the part that I sampled. So here's what that sounds like. Yeah, the proper music is maybe not if I talk over it. Like maybe if I talk over it, even though I don't know how loud the music is compared to me. So as I hear all of this going back, then I guess I'll be able to figure it out. You'll probably hear it as it is, and I'll just make adjustments in the future. But ultimately, that was the song that I sampled, or at least that's the part of the song that I sampled throughout this. So I'm going to show you everything just going off of that in terms of the melodic elements. So with that, there's a little intro here that I have, and I'm going to come back to that later. But for now, let's just start with how I've chopped the sample. So if we go into it, let's get into it here in this manner. I don't remember where I was going. Okay. So I typically like using Fruity Slicer to slice up my stuff. I find it's easier to do that in FL Studio. I'm not as big of a fan, or sorry, not that I'm not as big of a fan, but I haven't learned how to use Fruity Slice X yet. That seems a little more complicated. So one day I'll go into that. But for now, I've used Fruity Slicer to chop up the beat, and basically a good portion of the sample is gonna sound like this. And let me make sure I turned off all the effects. Yeah. Okay. So this pattern chopped up sounds like this for a good portion of the song. So that's one part. Another chop is that same thing, only I took out the very last note. So you'll hear it. It sounds like this. And lastly, what I have that I've used for basically the middle part and like the very end of the song is one other chop. This is when I start going into verse two, which I'll talk a little bit about the lyrics a little later. So here's what that sounds like. Hey, so I know you guys are hearing that and you're like, well, that doesn't sound too eventful. Well, to make it more interesting, I added a couple of effects to this sample. And actually, before I go into that, let me go into the intro that I said I was going to come back to. So I kind of took inspiration from sort of like a Pharrell, where he'll do that same like four beat, where like you'll hear a sound that goes like da 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 da, and then it goes into it like da 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 da. Just as an example. So here is what that sounds like. My rendition of that idea. Then after that, it goes straight into it. But I won't play the rest of it for you guys here. So anyway, let's go into the effects. So one thing that was like very apparent that I needed to do was add a delay effect to this. So if I go to Fruity Delay, I don't typically play around with this as much, mostly because I don't have a lot of knowledge on how to really utilize delay to such an advanced degree. So I basically played around with these two knobs of level and cutoff so that I'm really more accurately controlling how much of a delay effect you hear and how long that lasts. I don't think I played around with any other knob here on this. But as I turn it on and play those sounds again, you're going to see quite a big difference between how it sounded before and how it sounds now. So I will let you hear those three patterns again with Fruity Delay. Sorry, I accidentally let it repeat itself. But that is the first pattern. Like I said before, the second pattern is the same as the first one, like literally the same. Only I took out the last note as a way to transition into pattern three. And this is what that sounds like now with the delay effect. Sorry, sorry, that wasn't it. It would be this one. And that's how that actually or suddenly gained more space, or how I created more space with such simple sounds. This is an idea that if I continue making these types of videos, that you'll see a lot. I love doing that with these sort of sounds of being able to take something so simple being chopped up and adding space with delay effects. So another thing I added was Fruity Parametric EQ2. So basically, I took out some of the low by using a high pass filter here, and I played around with some other like mid frequencies, just turning them down a little bit, and I raised some of the high frequencies up a bit as well. So with an EQ added, now it'll sound like this. Let's see if we're able to hear the difference here. Maybe the more experienced listeners may be able to hear it, or maybe it's just apparent that anyone can hear it. I don't really know. But you will be able to hear that better probably compared to something like a bass line. But we're just playing it in solo for now. And we're going to play it in solo just to let you hear it again too when it comes to the third pattern that I made. Okay, so with that, I believe that's all of the melodic elements that I've used. The rest of this song is drums, bass, and vocals. Now, when it comes to that, the next thing I added was this percussion loop. I'm going to let you guys hear that as is. Do I have that on? Yes, I think I do. Let's go ahead and play it and find out. And you get the gist of that. That's generally the hi-hat loop that I had. I don't remember where I pulled this from. I made this beat, I think, back in like 2024. and am now finishing it or now releasing it, or may have now just released it recently by the time you're watching this video. So at that point, I believe I was using Splice X to do this. So I think this is a hi hat loop that I pulled from Splice X. And not Splice X, I'm sorry. What is that website called? I cannot remember. There's a website I used to use to be able to pull samples from, and I haven't used it since. If I remember the name of it, then I'll bring it up. But yeah, that's where I got this hi hat or this percussion loop from. And basically, when it comes to that, the only thing I did was I just used another parametric EQ on it, and I just cut out all of the low frequencies and some of the high frequencies. This is what it sounds like with that change. Sorry. Okay, that's it for the percussion loop. Now, I'm going in order based on when I inserted all of these instruments and when I put them in. So the next thing I actually did was actually I'm gonna do it a little differently. I think I will continue with the drums to make it more consistent. So the other set of drums that I added was another drum loop from that same website that I can't remember the name of right now. And basically, this is the drum loop that I pulled from. When it comes to these drums, between that and the hi hat loop, I was taking a lot of inspiration from the reggaeton style here. So when I was searching for these drums, I end up searching for and finding these two and putting them together. I did this before on the song "Floating" that I released, I think in 2024, where I also had this sort of like reggaeton influenced style with the drum, and I had like this bassier pad sounding like melody in the background, and I don't know. Somebody that's familiar with reggaeton tells me because I'm not familiar with reggaeton. I just like the sound when I hear it in passing. But someone tell me if there's an artist out there that does like the spacier sort of melodic sounds with like the reggaeton style drums. Because I'd like to hear what their songs sound like. Because I think those two elements sound really well together. And I just haven't really heard anything like that. So let me know in the comment section if you know an artist like that that I should check out. But anyway, this is the drum loop that I used when it came down to doing the more mixing and mastering elements. I used Fruity Slicer on that drum loop to separate each individual like drum pattern. So for instance, for the kick drum, let's see if I can zoom out and show you a little better. The kick drum, you won't be able to see it all in full, but I isolated it so it sounded like this. I did the same with the snare drum that I'll let you see here. Instead, by this point, I was a little lazy, so I copied and pasted everything from the drum loop, and I just muted everything except for where the snares hit. Here's what that sounds like. And I did the same thing with the hi-hat and shakers here. So let's pull that up. Okay. Those are all the drum elements. Something to note of what I added. If you put all these three together, let's see if I turn all of these off and I go into the mixer, the things that I've done with these drums is basically for the kick drum as a parametric EQ. I think I have an EQ in all of the sounds. I typically add an EQ to all of the sounds just to take out some sort of frequency that's unwanted or boost one or do something with frequencies. So for the kick drum, I boosted the low end a little bit of the kick drum so it could add a little more dump to it. For the limiter, I use this more for the mixing and mastering phase, which I think I'm going to try and weave a little bit of that into this. So I basically just use this as a compressor. I think I use it as a compressor. Let's play the kick drum and find out. Yes. So as you guys can see here, I have a compressor on the kick drum. So every time you see those peaks at the top, let me back up. Every time you see those peaks at the top, it's cutting off some of that frequency by a certain ratio. I'm not the best at explaining compression, so I'm going to leave it at that until I feel more confident explaining compression. But ultimately, I want to cut out some of those higher like sounds from the kick drum to make it so it's not dumping as hard, but still dumping fairly hard. And I did the same thing for the snare drums as well. For the EQ, I boosted a little bit of the low ends here. And for the limiter, it's a similar deal. If I was to turn on the snare, it'll be similar to the kick drum in terms of how I handle decompression. And the hi hat side looks like I didn't do anything to. I think it was really hard to hear these hi hats anyway, so I left them in just to add just a little bit more context to the drum loop. And I felt like at times the drum loop felt a little empty without them. Otherwise, I didn't do anything to them because I didn't feel like you were getting much out of these hi hats, especially because you have the other hi hat loop that I put into alongside the hi hats from the drum loop that I pulled. And let's see, do I want to talk about the buses yet? Uh, yeah, we can talk about them. Okay, so for the mixing and mastering phase, I've added what I've learned from utilizing Copilot to help me with this because I suck at mixing and mastering. I've added these buses. So you have a reverb bus, a drum bus, a melody slash bass bus, a vocal bus, which I'll talk about the vocals later, and a delay bus. So with these, basically what I'm doing is I'm taking every single sound, like all the drums I just talked about, I route them to the drum bus, and then I add some extra effects to it, which I'll talk about those. I'll talk about those now. So I added some effects to all the drums. Let me back up. So I took all of the drums, put them into this drum bus, and then I added these effects to all the drums put together. And then I routed this drum bus to the master channel. So all of it can be handled at once through one bus instead of each individual one. But I still have these effects that are happening in each individual bus before they go to the drum bus, if all of that makes sense. So what I added to the drum bus is I added a Fruity Soft clipper to help a little more with just the same deal of what I talked about with compressor, sort of, but I guess more of a limiter, where I'm cutting off some of those like top frequencies and trying to clean up the sound a little more. So I added a Fruity Soft clipper, and with Fruity Parametric EQ, of course, I have that in here again. I just brought down some of the low mids here. And that's it for that one. We'll talk about the melody bass bus after I talk about the bass. And reverb, I don't know what's actually connected to reverb. Oh, what's connected to it is the melody. So if we go to Fruity Reverb 2, I'm going to back up to the melody for a second. I know I'm all over the place, but I don't have a structure for this. I don't want to sit and edit this video to death because my editing skills are no bueno. So I'm just going to try my best to freeform all of this so I don't have to edit it. So it's just going to be all over the place until I know how to structure these videos. But the reverb bus for the melody, I believe I took just a little bit of the wet and raised it up and brought the dry down. Let me see. I don't fully remember how I handled the reverb here. Uh, yeah, okay, I see. So here, you see how you have different knobs? These knobs control how much of this effect go into the sound. So I turned some of the reverb effect a little bit down here for the melody after I augmented it into the free reverb effect. Whereas versus this, let me go back, sorry. Whereas when you see this knob going straight into the melody slash bass bus, I didn't change anything. I just left it the way it was. So that is what I've done for reverb. Now, as for the drums, um, I should let you hear what it all sounds together with just the drums. So this is what it sounds like with all the effects for the drums, excluding the first hi-hat loop I mentioned earlier in the video. Now, if I was to add the hi-hat loop as well, it'll sound like this. Okay, so next let's talk about the bass line. Okay, the bass line. This is one of my favorite things to add is the bass line. So this bass line in this song actually took a little bit of time for me to figure out how I wanted to design. And oddly enough, I'm surprised to see I used Harmer for this. Okay, well, I can't really do a great job of explaining this. I thought I used like 3x Oscillator or maybe GMS or another program. But if I was to look at how I've done this, basically I took this and brought it up a couple of like semitones. I don't know the term for this, but I brought this number up, which when you do that, it basically adds more voices. It kind of acts as like multiple like different. I don't know how to explain it, but I guess the short way to explain it is that it adds more like space to the sound. Now, somebody who's really good at explaining voices can or unison can mention that in the chat because I don't know how to explain that well yet. But I've done that. I have pitched the sound all the way down, and I remember when you go into the mixing aspect of the bass line. Let's see, where do I have up here? I added a fruity parametric EQ2 to this, surprise, surprise, and I used a low pass filter. So I sweeped it all the way back here so that all you can hear is just the lows. Otherwise, you're going to hear like a really interesting sound, which I will show you now. First, I'll let you hear what this sounds like without the effects. Actually, that might be all you need to hear is what this sounds like without the effects. So let's go ahead and do this. That sounds awful. I've never actually heard that sound all the way through like that. That sounds horrible. Okay, now let me show you what it sounds like with the parametric EQ, where it gets swept away. That's what that sounds like with that. But I've also added fruity fast distortion. So I added a distortion effect because, as you could probably hear, that sound is is all low frequency, so it sounds very low. But we want to add more harmonics and make it sound more like punchy or lively. So this is what it sounds like when I've added the fruity distortion to it. But I only added a little bit of distortion. I added about, if you see at the top left with the mix level, about 28%. I didn't want to destroy the sound with distortion on the bass line or the low end. So that's what I have here. The wave shaper is another sound that I added. I just added just a little bit of this basically saturation to both boost the sound more or the audibleness of the bass line, and I think really just that to clean it up a little bit as well. Here's what it sounds like with wave shaper added. Okay, so that is the bass line for the song. Um, to go into the melody bass side of things, I went and added a fruity limiter similar to the drums where I was playing around with compression. I think I did that with all three of these buses. Definitely vocals. I don't know if I did it with delay, but I did it with drums, melody, bass, and definitely vocals, which I'll talk about soon. And parametric EQ, I just raised some of the high ends here to help more with the melodic elements. And that is everything except for the vocals. So let's talk about the vocals. Uh, let's see. Well, I guess in that case, when it comes to the vocals, I will start by explaining the production part of it, and then I'll explain potentially the lyrical part. I think the lyrical part is pretty self-explanatory, but I may explain it anyway. Okay, so let's go into which one do I want to go into here? Uh, let's see. We're gonna let's hear a little bit of it. Oh, I guess I don't have that on. Yeah, let's turn that on. That would probably help, huh? Okay. So in the vocal recording, let's turn all of this off first. Actually, no, we can keep all of it on. So for the EQ, basically with my vocals, no, I lied. I'm going to turn it off first so you can see the difference between the vocals with and without. I believe this is the start of verse one where we're going to be at.
Gotta go get her. Don't want to be late.
And I didn't turn off all of this stuff. I didn't turn off the delay. Let's turn that off. What else am I attached to? Reverb. We're going to turn that off here. And you're going to, yeah. Okay.
Gotta go get her. Don't want to be late.
I still didn't turn off the delay, but it's fine. So, oh, no, I did. Okay. Sorry. Let's start with that. So, when it comes to this song, there's, or just when it comes to me in general, when it comes to delay for vocal effects, I'm very particular about where I want the vocal effects to actually kick in and where I don't want them to kick in. So if you see here the vocal delay sound effect automation, this is where that idea comes into play. So what I did was I went into Fruity Delay and I basically right clicked here and went create automation clip. And when you do that, it creates this. But it'll create this line all the way up at the top, all the way through. And if you right click certain parts, then you can create these like circles, which I think are control nodes. I don't remember what you call it, control points, I think. And then from there, you can like click and drag and move it around as you need to. And with that, what it does is when this bar is all the way up at the top, that means that it's on. So basically, it's like a switch turning this effect on and off. When it gets up to a certain point, it turns on, and while it's up there, it stays on. But when it comes down, it'll automatically turn off, and then it'll basically the way it looks like is it's on, then it gets here, turns off for this period of time, then it turns on, stays on, and then it turns off. So you'll see there's phases in the song where I have the delay effect on and where I have it off. Right now, it looks like I'm on the chorus part of the song, and I wanted to keep it on all the way throughout the chorus. So if you hear it again, this is what it sounds like.
Gotta go get her. Don't want to be late. Wanted to taste, make or break. Too much space.
That's an example of that. But then when you get to here, which I think is one of the later verses, yeah, this is I think verse two. I didn't actually want a delay effect here. I want it to be more raw. So this is what it sounds like without that.
Down, but now I contemplated returning to the sound and hesitated to make a claim around the idea of seeing her rewound to lounging.
Yeah, I didn't want it there because my vocals were too like dynamic. I think is the word I want to use for me to add delay effect there. And I think it would have been too distracting if I did that. That's more of a design choice for why I use delay like that more like deliberately when it comes to vocals. So if I was to go into the other effects, the other things I added was pre EQ2, of course, and I used the high pass filter to take out some of the lows in my voice so that it wasn't clashing with the bass line. I took out a little bit of the low mid frequencies and I raised some of the highs to add a little more clarity. As for the limiter, I did the same thing as everything else. My vocals are gonna peak. So even as I've been talking now, my vocals are going up and down, just like this wave that you're seeing here. My vocals are going up and down and up and down in volume and tone and all of that stuff. And that's what I'm helping, or that's what the compressor should be helping with, is cutting that down because there's going to be points where I'm loud and then there's points where I'm going to be quiet. So we want to make it so with the compressor, we have all the sound sounding around the same level as possible. And then I can turn things up and turn things down as needed to have a more consistent volume. So that's the fruity limiter on my vocals. Fruity soft clipper was similar to, I believe, the bass line I said, where I added it to add a little more saturation to my vocals and just overall clean things up a little more in terms of like peaking and mixing and mastering stuff. So if we were to hear this again with all of those effects, this is what it would sound like.
Down, but now I contemplated returning to the sound and hesitated to make a claim around the idea of seeing her rewound to lounging.
Okay. So I believe that's all of the effects of the vocals. Let me just make sure I didn't miss anything. Oh, yeah, there is Matt Smith. So, do I want to talk about this now? Yeah, that's fine. I really just added this Maximus here as a de-esser. So when you make these sounds, they pop out a lot more. So the de-esser was there to kind of tone those S sounds down as best as I could. I don't know how to really augment it that well. So I went into the presets, I went into de-essing, and I used de-esser, I think, split band, which created this. So that was the point of that Maximus channel. And reverb, I forgot to mention that, but I added reverb to my vocals. So I'll play that portion again so you hear the reverb.
Down, but now I contemplated returning to the sound and hesitated to make a claim around the idea of seeing her rewound to lounging back.
Just adding a little more space to my vocals here. And with that, let me again just do another check to make sure I've talked about everything. Um, yeah, the only thing I haven't talked about is the master. I've talked a lot about mixing for each individual stuff, each individual like track, but I didn't talk about mastering. So Edison is just that chop that I showed you guys earlier in the very beginning of that sample that I hope they don't get me for. So this is Edison just having that there. It pops up every time you start dragging and bringing in sounds and such. Parametric EQ. All of this is, by the way, on the master track. So this is the mastering phase. This is me trying to take the sound that I have of my song and make it loud for you guys to hear. Of course, it's as loud as I can get because there's a number of factors that contribute to this, like sound selection and sound quality and like the quality of my mixing and mastering skills. So it's not quite there yet. My songs are quieter than your commercial sounds, but this is the best I can get right now without pushing it too far to past its peaks and you hearing clicks and pops all day. That's not fun. I think you'd be much more happy to just hear the sound just be a little quieter. You have to turn it up as opposed to it being so loud that it just bursts your eardrums when you hear it. So that's why I did that. But anyway, going back to the mastering. So I took out some of the low ends with the high pass filter and I raised some of the high ends for a little more clarity on the high end. And then I added Maximus, which honestly, I can't really explain this all too well because I'm still learning Maximus. So the best I could say is I used this preset this time and clicked on Clear Master to give me a good baseline here. And then I played around with all these knobs to try and get things as best as possible. And this is where I utilize Copilot's help to figure out what knobs to try and turn and do this and that as my rubric. And over time, I'll be slowly learning how to really utilize Maximus. And then in future videos, I should be able to tell you what specifically I did in Maximus. So just know that I'm working on it. But this is like a big thing that I've used for boosting the volume of my sound, which leads me to the last one, the Fruity Limiter. The Fruity Limiter was also something that I've used to push the sound. I raise the gain as best as I can and the ceiling. So basically, the ceiling is just think about being inside your house, right? Like if you keep going up and up and up, then let's say you're on a ladder and you keep going up and up and up, eventually you're gonna hit the ceiling. You can't go up anymore. That's the same thing here. We're raising the volume up and up and up, and as your volume hits that ceiling, it can't go up anymore. So the limiter, what it's gonna do is any sound that goes up past that ceiling, it's gonna chop it. That chop is what is called clipping. And clipping is this really harsh sound that you hear, this the sound in the song. It can be very quick, or I think it can be very long. I'm usually very conscious about trying to make sure that doesn't happen. And I have songs where I have clipping. And there are things such as soft clipping where you'll hear it very quietly. I think that's fine. But some of them is really loud, meaning your volume was really loud. And all the other streaming sites and YouTube, they have their own like level of loudness that you can reach. And once you get past that loudness, then the system's automatically going to do that same thing I just mentioned of chopping that top sound off, and it's going to have that clipping sound, and that's what you want to avoid. So that's what this limiter is for, is another checks and balance here. And so with that, I believe that is the end of the sound design portion of it. Let me see if I can explain the lyrics, if I remember the lyrics, to be honest with you. Um, okay, let's see. So for the song lyrics, so this is something that I struggled with quite a long time. This is why it took me like 2 years to put this song out. Because I was thinking of, well, I've made this instrumental. Do I want to rap on it? Do I want to try and sing on it? What story am I going to try to tell? And at first, when I made this song, it was going to be called Vision. Like I was thinking of like I want to see into the future with this sort of song, or maybe there's something future related. Maybe I'm doing something with glasses. I don't know. I can't see. I lost my vision, or I have like a goal of a vision for the future. So I didn't know where to go with that. And after a while, after I really sat down with it this year and started playing around with it, I started thinking, or I started writing about a song about some girl, right? And I thought about just putting myself in this space of being somewhere where I want to talk to this girl, but I'm really nervous about talking to her. And so as I started working those lyrics and started writing it down with the hi there, blank stare, grab a small chair, I started thinking, well, maybe I could just have this sort of like awkward like guy trying to get to this girl and I don't know how. And now that whole vision idea and turned into envision. Now I'm using this song to envision getting to know this girl and maybe we go somewhere, maybe we don't. I don't know. And that was the driving force when it came to the songwriting for this one. It's just that title of Envision. And so I decided to rap on it. I don't know when I'm gonna come back to singing, if I'm ever gonna come back to singing. There's gonna be a song where I talk about that in the future. I don't know when I'm gonna release a song like that, but I'm sure it's gonna come where I talk more in depth about why I haven't sung in a while and while I don't plan on it, at least for now, to come back and start singing. So I didn't do that. And let me see, is there anything else to talk about when it comes to these song lyrics? Um, the end of the song. The end of the song, I left it on like this sort of cliffhanger here of I got to talk to this girl, and now we're gonna go get something to eat. But where are we gonna go? And she's like, I don't know. Honestly, I thought that was an interesting end, but I did that for a couple reasons. The one biggest reason is because that's as far as I got with the instrumental, and I didn't want to rap anymore. I'm good. That was like 3 minutes, but I didn't want to do it anymore. Three verses, two hooks, and that's fine. And the other thing is, if I did that, then I would have to extend the song out. I would have to drag the story on even longer. And I think this is overstaying its welcome if I added the fourth verse. So I thought this cliffhanger was good. Plus, I think the cliffhanger is good too, because if I decide to come back in the future and make a sequel, then it's there. We know right where we left off at, and we can just pick it up from there. And yeah, that's why I did that. I'm sure there's gonna be other things I wish I said in terms of the vocals, like vocal delivery, vocal performance, all that. But I don't have anything that comes to mind, so I'm just gonna cut it off there. And I'm gonna stop by saying thank you everyone that watched this whole video. Hopefully I'm not gonna edit it and I'm just gonna leave it as is. Hopefully this sounds good enough to be posted. And also, hopefully this isn't gonna get me copyrighted for that sample that I pulled. But I guess we'll have to see when we release it. So just like I said before, I'm gonna say it again. Just like how I don't have an intro, I also don't have an outro. So we're just gonna bounce from here. Thank you all for checking out the video, and I'm out. Peace.